Welcome back to Crossover Commander, where we show you how to take your favorite pop culture characters and cross them through the blind eternities so that they can command your deck with style. I'd like to send a huge shout out to my patrons, Deface and Zephyr at my Adept tier, and Nitron and Matachu at my Knight tier. As a consideration for all of you fans out there, consider please subscribing to the Patreon. It gives you early access to my gameplay videos, as well as, if you do the Knight tier or above, an option to get your very own deck. Let's kick this portal into overdrive, shall we? Fate is a funny thing. As Master Oogway once said, there are no accidents. And this deck is much the same. It may seem odd on the front, but hidden inside is the reason. So first, let me introduce you to Oogway, Lagoon Mystic. For one, a black, a green, and a blue. This legendary turtle shaman says, as long as Oogway is tapped, other permanents enter the battlefield tapped, and as long as Oogway is untapped, other permanents enter the battlefield untapped. And his quote on the bottom is very fitting, because life is not a race. For the Rule 0 and power level, Master Oogway reminds us that all we need is inside, and that life is not a race, but if the enemy is at the gate, kick an awesome amount of butts. As for strategy, this deck is as flexible as Master Viper, as precocious as Master Monkey, as quick as Master Mantis, as ferocious as Master Tigress, as swift as Master Crane, and as indomitable as Master Poe. Claiming victory with this deck seeks to flow with the existing conditions of the table, to exact the preferred outcome. It can win through combat, it can win without combat, it can win with commander damage, it can win with regular damage. You just need to flow with the way of the table. This is the perfect time to remind you that this is a crossover themed build. With that being said, crucial cards for the theme will be added regardless of price. Cards that are not essential to fit the theme will be made as budget friendly as possible. All good legends start at the beginning, so we will too. We've got 14 forests, 9 islands, 6 swamps, a command tower, Guildless Commons, Simic Growth Chamber, Demir Aqueduct, and Golgari Rot Farm. Then we have Reliquary Tower and Rogue's Passage to round off our lands. And then to start our ramp, we've got Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Power Stone Shard, followed by some very interesting ramp options in Rites of Flourishing, Gear for Ori, Bounty of the Luxa, Glorious Sunrise, and Zendikar Resurgent. So this legend begins with an unassuming but awesome panda. I introduce you to Poe, Awesomeness Among Bears. For 1 and a green, this legendary panda says whenever another bear enters the battlefield under your control, choose 1. Put 2+1/+1 counters on target bear, or target bear you control fights target creature you don't control. And then we meet Ping, his dad, the owner of the noodle shop in town. For 1 green, this gilded goose has flying, and when he enters the battlefield, you create a food token. And for 1 and a green, you can tap it to create a food token, and then you can tap him to sacrifice a food to add a mana of any color. Then we are introduced to the Furious 5. We've got Crane, Wanderwing Familiar. For 1 and a blue. This legendary bird has flying, and spells your opponent's cast that target 1 or more commanders you control cost 3 more to cast. Make sure we keep our Master Oogway safe. And then we've got Viper, Daughter of Shishiro. For 2 and 2 green. This snake shaman says other snakes you control get +0 and +1, and shamans you control have tap to add 2 green mana. And then we've got Mantis, the Blight Cutter. For 3 and a green. This guy's got protection from black and threshold. When you hit threshold, he gets +1/+1 for each black permanent your opponents control. And then we've got Tigress, the cat warrior, for 1 and 2 green. She's got first strike, forest walk, and vigilance. And then we've got Monkey. For 4 and 2 green, this legendary ape warrior has kicker for 5. And if Monkey was kicked when he enters the battlefield, he gets +5/+5 in counters. And when he attacks alone, double the power and toughness until end of turn. And then we got the Masters of the Jade Temple. We've got Oogway, like we've already seen. And then we've got Master Sifu, the All Form. Now, you're going to look at me and go, but crossover, that's a weird one. Well, I will have you know, I searched through every single card, and there's nothing even close to a red panda in Magic. So, we're going with Changeling, because they're everything. Why not? But his ability says Changeling, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, if it targets one or more other permanents you control, create a token that's a copy of one of those permanents. And then when a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard this card, create a token that's a copy of target permanent. Cool stuff. Then we get to meet some of the other masters of Kung Fu. We've got Master Rhino the Loyal Guardian for 4 and a green. He has Trample and Lieutenant at the beginning of your combat on your turn. If you control your commander, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And then we've got Master Ox the Golden Hide for 5 and a green. He has Constellation. Whenever Golden Hide Ox or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, target creature must block this turn if able. And then we've got Master Crocodile for 2 and a blue and a black. When Master Crocodile comes into play, return a blue or black creature you control to its owner's hand. And then when Master Crocodile comes into play, each player discards a card from his or her hand. You can do some weird shenanigans if you got enough mana, where you bounce him to his own effect, but you still get the discard and you make your opponents discard their entire hand. Nasty stuff. All of these masters and all of their awesomeness influences the village of pandas to stand up for what's right. We've got Ayula's Influence for 3 green. It discards a land, and you create a 2/2 green bear creature token. And then we've got Words of Wilding for 2 and a green. For 1 mana, the next time you would draw a card this turn, put a 2/2 green bear creature token into play instead. And then we've got Zendikar's Royal for 3 and 2 green. It has landfall, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 green elemental creature token. Let's face it, these pandas were kind of a force of nature. Now, you can't keep all this awesomeness in one space without attracting a little bit of negative attention. We've got Tai Long the Debaser for 4 and 2 black. This cat demon says, when Tai Long attacks, put target creature card from defending player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And then for 6 and 2 black, you can encore him out of the graveyard, basically creating copies for all of your opponents to have to fight. Pretty nasty card. And then we've got Shen, the Coveted Peacock, for 3 and 2 black. It has flying, and whenever Shen attacks, you may goad target creature defending player controls. And then we've got Kai, the Soul Reaper, for 2 and a black. He has for 2 and a black. You sacrifice a creature and you draw a card. But never to fear, because the Dragon Warrior is here. For 5 and 2 blue, this legendary spirit has Moonfolk Offering, which is not necessary in this deck, but he has flying. And for 1 mana, you can put up to 2 land cards from your hand into play. So now I'm sure that after looking at all these different cards that I've shown you so far, you're thinking, oh my god, Crossover's lost it. But I promise you I haven't. So we start this section of secrets with the Scroll of the Masters. For 2 generic mana, This says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a lore counter on Scroll of the Masters, and then for 3 and a tap, you can target a creature you control, and it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each lore counter on Scroll of Masters. And then we've got Paradise Mantle for 0 mana. It says equipped creature has tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and its equip cost is 1. Then we've got Shaper's Sanctuary for a green. It says whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, you draw a card. Then we've got Wishclaw Talisman for 1 and a black. It enters the battlefield with 3 wish counters on it. And then for 1, you can tap it to remove a wish counter and search your deck, and then you pass it to an opponent, and then they pass it to another opponent. If you politic right, you can get 2 tutors out of this. Pretty good card. And then we've got Walking Atlas for 2 generic mana. It says tap, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. This does go over the 1 land per turn rule, just so you know. And then we've got Compost for 1 and a green. It says whenever a black card is put into an opponent's graveyard, you may draw a card. And then we have Insight for 2 and a blue. Whenever 1 or more opponents plays a green spell, you draw a card. And then we have Beastmaster's Ascension for 2 and a green. It says whenever a creature you control attacks, you may put a quest counter on Beastmaster's Ascension. And as long as Beastmaster's Ascension has 7 or more quest counters on it, creatures you control get +5/+5. And then we have Barrier Breach for 2 and a green. It says exile up to 3 target enchantments. And then it has Cycling for 2. And then we have Colossal Majesty for 2 and a green. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card. And then we've got Primal Empathy for 1, a green, and a blue. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card if you control a creature with the greatest power among creatures on the battlefield. Otherwise, you put a 1/1 counter on that creature instead. And then we've got Mythos of Brokos for 2 and 2 green. It says if blue and black was spent to cast this spell, search your library for a card, put that card onto into your graveyard, and then shuffle your library. And then return up to 2 permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. And then we've got Dig Up for 1 green, but really we're going to be casting it for its cleave cost of 1, 2 black, and a green. It says search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. And then we've got Mastermind's Acquisition for 2 and 2 black. It says choose 1, search your library for a card and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Or choose a card from you own from outside the game, but we don't really use that function, so don't worry about it. And then we have Seer's Sundial for 4 generic mana. It has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2. If you do, draw a card. And then we have Concord with the Kami. It's an enchantment for 3 and a green. It says at the beginning of your end step, choose 1 or more. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature with a counter. Draw a card if you control an enchanted creature, or create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token if you control an equipped creature. Then we've got Horizon Stone for 5 generic mana. It says if you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes colorless instead and gets stored in a pool. And then we've got Sentinel's Flute for 5 generic mana. It says for X, you can tap it, search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Then we've got Green Sun Zenith for X and a green. It says search your library for a green creature card with converted mana cost X or less. Put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library, and you shuffle Green Sun Zenith back in. And then we've got Blue Sun Zenith for X and 3 blue. It says target player draws X cards, shuffle Blue Sun Zenith into its owner's library. And then we've got Emergent Ultimatum for 2 black, 3 green, and 2 blue. It says search your library for up to 3 monocolored cards with different names and exile them. An opponent chooses one of those cards, shuffle that card into your library. You may cast the other cards without paying their mana cost, and then you exile Emergent Ultimatum. Shh! These are the real super secrets of the Master. This is what's going to make this whole deck click together. We start with Trait Doctrine for 1 blue. It says, change the text of target permanent by replacing all instances of one color word with another of one basic land type with another until end of turn. Now, it's got Cipher. Now, what Cipher does, this is important, when you may exile this spell when you cast it and encode it onto a creature you control. And then whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of the encoded card without paying its mana cost. And then we've got Whim of Volrath. For 1 blue, it also has buyback for 2 generic. So for 3 mana in total, it says change the text of target permanent by replacing all instances of one color word or basic land type with another until end of turn. Then you bring it back to your hand. Then we've got Void Walk for 3 and a blue. It says exile target creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. It also has Cipher. And then we have Stolen Identity for 4 and 2 blue. It says create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature. So these cards work perfectly with Master Sifu and allow you to manipulate the permanents on your battlefield to make sure you're getting the advantages that you need. For example, Mantis's protection from black can become protection from blue or green. Compost, when they when they have a black card enter the graveyard, you could be looking for a red card to enter the graveyard. Very tricky stuff here. And then we've got Kodama of the East Tree for 4 and 2 green. It has reach, and whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't put onto the battlefield with this ability, you may put a permanent card with equal or lesser converted mana cost from your hand onto the battlefield. Now this will combo with our Zendikar's Royal, as well as a land drop to let us get extra stuff, especially if we're using our bounce lands, because then we can bounce the land back to our hand, get a creature that's free, bring back the land, infinite token army. Super cool stuff. And then we've got Retreat to Coral Helm, Retreat to Kazandu, and then Retreat to Hagura. They are for 2 and then a respective blue, green, or black. And they all have landfall. And Coral Helm says you may tap or untap target creature. And then it's Scry 1. Or Scry 1. And then Kazandu says put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or gain 2 life. And then Hagura says target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn. Or each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. These will allow you to do some shenanigans for sure. And then we've got Skyclave Pickaxe for 1 green. It says when it enters the battlefield, you attach it to target creature you control. Then it's got Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, equipped creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. See, between this and then the Retreat to Kazandu, we can get our Oogway infinitely big with certain triggers from Landfall, and then smack our opponents for commander damage. Now we've got Freed from the Real to make sure we're tapping and untapping him whenever we need to allow for whatever plays we want to play. And then we've got Whispering Madness and Shadow Slice. They've both got Cipher, but Whispering Madness for 2 and a blue and a black says each player discards his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. Great way to refill your hand, or punish your opponents for having a greedy hand. And then we got Shadow Slice that says target opponent loses 3 life. Now, these will happen every time that creature that gets ciphered attacks, so they're repeatable, which is nice. Alright, and then to wrap up the whole deck, we've got Helix Pinnacle for 1 green. It says Shroud and X. You can put X tower counters on Helix Pinnacle, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 100 or more, you win the game. And then Arcane Adaptation, Masquid Nexus, and Xenograft pull all of our disparate creature types together to work as a team. As Master Oogway said, there are no accidents. And this is what I'm talking about. All those creatures that seem like they didn't work together well, now do. Because all of our creatures can be shamans, so they can all tap for mana. They can all be bears, so they can all fight or gain counters. Very tricky stuff. And then you gotta make sure they're true warriors after all, right? So the pros for this deck is it showcases tons of different ways to win, from mill to Voltron to combo to good old combat, and won't get shut out by strategy hate. The cons, though, like Poe, this deck is so awesome that sometimes it's unfocused. Now that we've gone through the awesomeness that is the Kung Fu Panda deck, we can check out the average price and stats. At time of release, it's between $145 to $230, depending on where you purchase from. As always, if you're willing to play with heavily played or damaged cards, it can be cheaper. And then for the stats, we've got 17-ish ramp. It can go a little bit more if we pull some shenanigans. Then we've got about 8 tutors. Then we've got about 13 forms of card draw. Again, can go a lot higher depending on some shenanigans that we can play. And then we've got 11 forms of interaction and 0 board wipes, along with 36 lands. Remember, this is a crossover themed build. With that being said, crucial cards for the theme were added regardless of price. Cards that were not essential to fit the theme were made as budget-friendly as possible. If you want to optimize this list, feel free to leave your upgrades in the comments section below. Most importantly, this deck is meant to be a new and engaging way to spice up your Commander games, so fun is the top priority. Thank you for watching this crossover deck tech. If you liked this video, check out our other content on YouTube or TikTok. Your viewership means the multiverse to the crossover commander, and if you would like to become a part of this growing Terran reality, you can like, share, and subscribe. If you would like to vote on the next pop culture character to crossover, check out our Patreon where we have some awesome perks. If you have any ideas or complaints, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. Now that this portal's closing, see you next time.